time zone 11:06. This is our podcast, and today we're going to talk about, I guess you could say, good bugs, bad bugs, beneficial insects.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that there's actually good bugs out there for plants, huh?
Well, you know what? It's like good bacteria, right? There's bad bacteria, good bacteria.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I guess it
just like
does
that.
make sense, but I think we need to clear up some things and get into some detail as far as how people can better utilize good bugs, bad bugs.
Yeah, and so, the term beneficial insects is exactly what it is. I mean, these are bugs that benefit our gardens, and they're not the bugs that are out there decimating our yards, decimating our gardens, troubling our fruit or vegetables or anything like that. These are bugs that are somehow controlling, keeping a balance out there in our yard. John just mentioned, let's start off with the number one beneficial insect out there. What is it, John?
Well, ladybugs are the most common.
Yeah.
And they're also the least threatening. You don't mind having a little ladybug, crawling on your hand.
Right.
But I wanted, before we talk about the ladybugs, I quickly wanted to mention how our solutions today are more ecologically or environmentally friendly than they were years ago. Thinking back to the 60s when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and her book was a chapter called Indiscriminately from the Skies. And they would take crop dusters out and they would dust whole neighborhoods and they would kill every insect that was in sight.
Not just the bad ones.
Right,
like
but
every
also
insect.
the beneficial ones. And all it did was make the problem worse because with the beneficial insects dead, there was nothing to keep the bad ones in check.
Right.
So, now we realize, as Tiger just mentioned, that there are insects that are good as far as what we would call good.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess all insects just want to survive.
Now, what would a ladybug eat in your garden? Why would I want to put like 1,000 ladybugs in my garden?
Well, we mentioned that ladybugs, just mentioned they look cute, right?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and kids
Yeah.
like ladybugs,
Sure.
and they do eat aphids.
Yep.
But that's the adult ladybug, and the adult ladybug really doesn't eat that many compared to the larva of a ladybug, which is not so cute looking and actually looks like something you'd want to kill, right?
Yeah, people get confused because they see ladybug larvae on plants
Right.
and they get it mistaken by some kind of,
Right.
bad beetle or some kind
And probably for every aphid that a ladybug would eat, a ladybug larva would eat 50.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the
quite
difference.
a difference.
Yeah. And so, that's the hard part of the ladybugs. Usually you go to the garden center and you buy this little box or little cup of ladybugs and you release them. And like you said, you'll see them eating the aphids on roses and your
Right.
different crops, which are great. But that's not what you want. You want the life cycle to be in your yard. You
Right.
want the eggs to be laid. You want the larvae to come out and about. That's what you're trying to create. You're not using those adult ladybugs to do the problem. What you want is but to do that, you can't be spraying bad insecticides that are going to kill everything
If you
inside.
kill the aphids, there's nothing for the ladybugs to eat, right?
Yeah.
So there is a balance there, and you've got to be willing to put up with it. But if you, rather than spraying for aphids, if you go get the ladybugs, bring them home. They usually recommend releasing them in the evening, right?
Correct. Near a water source.
Because if you put them out in the day, they probably just fly away.
And
But at
another
night-
good point to remember too is once they've eaten everything, they're going to move on. There's nothing left if they've done their job.
Yeah, except there will be a balance, and there'll always be a few aphids for them to eat, but just never enough to destroy your plants. Then there's after ladybugs, praying mantis.
Yep.
Is the other thing that people
The bad boys of
recognize.
the insect
Yeah.
world.
And praying mantis can eat some larger insects, and they really look tough, but I don't really think that they control insects the way that we would think that they do. I mean, they're nice to have in the yard. It shows that your yard is in balance if you've got those. But if you've got a huge insect infestation, the answer's not going to be those. Usually, if you have bad insects, you have to target them with an insect that specifically goes after them.
Yeah, and in that, Decklid snails. If you have those, European garden snails that are plaguing your plants, eating holes throughout all the leaves, Decklid snails in some regions are a great answer because they are the carnivorous snail that goes after those, slugs and snails in your garden. And this, I will attest to this, is that I've had great success with Decklid snails controlling the slug and snail population in my yard, and it was really easy to do. Now, it is one of those things that you buy a cup,
Okay.
and you get these shells in there. You don't even know if they're alive because you just see these shells. You don't actually, it's
But
very rare.
They're heavy. There's got to be something in there.
No, the shells feel very lightweight. Like you don't even know if there's anything in there.
But there is.
Well, they're estivating.
Yeah.
I don't think you can say that on the air, John.
Yeah, that just beeped.
Okay, so they're estivating.
Yeah.
And so let's say, an example. You've seen my patio, right?
Yes.
How many would I need in my patio?
1 cup, and then you sprinkle them throughout the pots.
And just put them in the different pots.
Yeah, exactly. And then within 6 weeks, you start to see your slug and snail population just go away.
You guys sell them at Mission Hills Nursery?
Yeah,
Decklid
yeah.
snails?
And most garden centers will
should
sell
get a
them.
cup,
and
yeah.
and John had mentioned this, I don't remember if he mentioned it on the air for our show today, but there's only certain regions that you can use these in.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in California, it's the 7 southern counties.
Mm-hmm. And what about other states? Like, do you know, is there, because they don't work everywhere,
Well, northern states don't have snails, so they don't have to
They
worry
don't have to
because
worry
it's
about
too
that.
cold. I'm not really sure about other states. The reason you can't use them in Northern California is because of native snails that the Decklid snails will
Right.
kill,
Right,
Yeah.
right.
and they're trying to protect those.
And those are indigenous to that part of the country,
Right, so we don't
whereas
wanna
the
get rid of
European
those.
snails were brought in, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, John.
And
Right.
and so using that targeted bug to control things, it prevents you from using insecticides, chemicals. It prevents you from having damage done to your plants that you're trying to constantly curb or
I
trying
think I'm going
to
to get a bucket of Decklid snails. I really, because I'm thinking about now, the more and more we talk about that is definitely what's going on in my patio with the chewing and the way we're discussing this.
Yeah. So Decklid snails is a really great way to spear a direct problem. Another one is nematodes. Nematodes are a beneficial insect, and when people hear nematodes, they hear about all the problems with nematodes, with tomatoes, nematodes with roses.
Root knot nematode, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, but there are beneficial ones that you can use that would actually curb some of those problems.
Mm-hmm.
Now these are really hard to use.
I've heard people say using beneficial nematodes to kill bad nematodes. I don't think they do. Do they? I mean, I could be wrong, but the main reason for using beneficial nematodes is for grubs that are in the soil. They attack the grubs. And I think flea larvae also help reduce fleas, but I don't know if they attack.
If you go and you look, there's a whole spectrum of nematodes now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like the flea killing ones, there's grub killing ones, and then there's ones that, actually, again, not solve, but control other nematode problems. And it's amazing how detailed.
So you have to buy that particular species.
That's what I'm saying. It's amazing how detailed they broke it down now.
Wow.
But the weirdest thing is how you apply them, to me. Because what you
use a hose and sprayer, don't you?
Well, yeah, but it's like you in a garden center, sometimes they stock them. But for the most part, you kind of order them online, or the garden center will have them shipped.
If they're in a garden center, don't they have to be refrigerated?
Yeah, and that's why I think the most of the time it's one of these things, you get them shipped to you or you order them online.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they ship you is kind of a refrigerated package of a sponge. And you get the sponge in an envelope, and then you take that sponge and you put it into like a water solution, and then you can use a watering can or you can use a hose and sprayer. And I mean, this isn't like ladybugs. This isn't like praying mantis. You can't see anything.
Right.
So
It's like
you're
the
just
emperor's new clothes.
You're kind of wondering, what am I doing?
You're
Is this
afraid to
working?
say that nothing's really there.
yeah. And I mean, and then as far as seeing results, you talk about the flea, because that was probably the first one that they kind of introduced. You might see results 6 to 8 weeks later, but again, it's hard to measure. But they're good. I mean, I'm not gonna downplay the use of them, because they do work. The science is there. They have been proven. If you introduce them into the yard, you can have some control in this way. But it's a faith-based experience.
Well, another insect that's great, beneficial insect that's great at controlling bad bugs in the garden, and the first time I ever saw this, I thought I had an infestation of something and I needed to take care of it. But underneath a leaf, if you ever notice what looks like an egg on a stem and you see a row of them, like this little filament with a egg at the end of it, and you've got a row of those, you want to wipe those off because you think something's wrong. But they're the eggs of lacewings. And green lacewings are just phenomenal for taking care of all kinds of insects.
And now, can you get those too? I'm trying to think.
Used to be able to.
I was going to say you used to be able to, but I haven't seen them in the market for a while, so I don't know as much anymore. But
I think it's another thing where you need to order them so they're fresh.
Yeah.
And you said the snails come they're chilled, right? They're cooled when they arrive?
That's what. No, the Decklid snails, they could be kind of on a shelf.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're just dormant.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
sitting there
The
waiting
praying mantis, the Decklid snails, the ladybugs, they're all just kind of on a shelf.
As they would be normally. Okay.
Sometimes you'll go into a garden, so you'll see a refrigerator that keeps at a not at a real cool level, just kind of a mildly cool temperature where they'll keep them packaged in there, kind of puts all of those things into a little bit of dormancy. But for the most part, they all just keep them on shelves. And now in this group, I'll break this into two, and these aren't necessarily beneficial insects from the standpoint of bugs, but you'll see worms. You'll see red wiggler worms, and you'll see earthworms sometimes. I don't know what the other term for an earthworm would be, but a nightcrawler. You'll see worms, and the red wiggler worms are meant to be composting worms. I know for San Diego County, if you put red wiggler worms into your yard, they probably won't survive. They need moist, loose soil that has a lot of decomposing material in there to survive. They only stay within the first few inches of soil, so that's usually dry and hard for us in San Diego County. But night crawlers, the earthworms, they'll be in our yards, and those are great because they do a good process of composting our soil, processing our soil, and aerating our soil, and a lot of other things. So, if you have a lawn or a garden bed, incorporating night crawlers into the garden is also good. Benefits the plants in a lot of ways as well.
And if you're a fisherman,
you've got a lifetime supply.
Got bait in your
right.
yard.
Do you know how you draw up the earthworms? Like the earthworms, not the red wiggler worms. The composting worms are
get 'em
easy.
up the surface?
Yeah. The composting worms are easy because you can just put like a piece of melon or something like that, and they'll go right up into it. But the night crawlers are a little bit different. Have you ever tried to do that though? Would try to draw them out?
Don't you just water?
Yeah, I was gonna say all you have to do is just water heavily.
Right
Like not
top.
just water, you got to water heavily, and they'll all just start. And it's funny because a lot of people will see these little like soil mounds, and they think it's some kind of weird bug or something. That's just the little night crawlers where they come out and
we used to have
sometimes.
a saying in Michigan: when it rains, the worms come out. And you could look at the sidewalk, and there would be the entire sidewalk's covered with worms after a rain.
Yeah.
But it's because they can't breathe in the ground. They're drowning, right? So they've got to come out, and then the sun comes out, bakes the ones that couldn't get back.
Get to the shade.
The birds are all full.
Yeah.
Now, what about parasitic wasps? I know that there's a lot of wasps that will attack particular insect problems. I think there's some for, wasn't that a wasp they used for the giant whitefly?
Yeah. And Eugenia,
right.
For the psyllid, they
right.
use a parasitic wasp as
Right.
well. And
now, are those available though? Or?
No, you know what they tell you to do for the Eugenia? Leave the foliage off the bottom. So they tell you not to clean it, because I guess that's where parasitic wasps go and stay, is under the plants. And I don't know about for the giant whitefly one either, because I don't know how you would draw that into your yard, but yeah, I haven't seen those available on the market to be introduced.
I know the
well.
one that was available, and you can probably order online, is the trichogramma wasp, and that's a parasitic wasp. But again, they only attack certain varieties of species of insects.
But that's the good thing behind these is you're targeting, one problem. You're not using a broad spectrum solution.
Right.
And all of these things are, as you mentioned, Brian, it's keeping things in balance. Because like you say, if there's not enough snails to eat, Decklid snail population will drop off. If there's not enough aphids or those bugs to eat, you're going to have your ladybug. Because, you know, if you have too many ladybugs, I don't know what the problem with that, but I'm sure there is a problem with that, you know. But
if you've ever collected ladybugs or seen where they collect them, you know, they're up in the mountains and they're about 2 to 3 feet deep of just ladybugs.
Solid.
And they just go with shovels and scoop them up. And so I don't think you can have too many.
Too many. No, it's not a problem.
I think they're just happy.
Yeah. So, you know, beneficial insects are out there. I mean, you mentioned the wasp, which is something that you can't always purchase, but you know, there also there are good ways to draw these insects into your yard. You know, I mentioned, you know, about Eugenians on how they tell you to leave the foliage at the base.
Right.
There's a lot of you know, natural beehives that you had mentioned a dog going into a wood pile. Well, sometimes, you know, a wood pile is just a great natural beehive or wasp nest that, you know, yeah, it might draw some ones that you don't want, which, you know, bees and wasps aren't necessarily bad, but they would probably provide a good home for some beneficial ones. Ladybugs, they tell you to leave your lawn growing long or provide them with grasses. I guess their home is a lot of grasses and things like that. That's where they kind of tend to
that's a good point
towards.
that you bring up too, is that you need some type of, and there's a lot of different annuals you can look up online and find out what type of flowers attract certain insects, because a lot of them will eat pollen too, you know, and they need, you need a pollen source for some of these insects. So having a diversified, or as we saw in England, a long border, you know, with all different kinds of plants is going to encourage more beneficial insects.
And, you know, I think John, you know, touches on this throughout our shows on a constant basis because he's a rose lover, is that there's always just finding the balance out there in the yard. I mean, you know, so what, your roses have a little bit of aphid problem. So what if, you know, you've got a little bit of white fly on some of these plants? You know, keeping it in balance, keeping it, you know, in check is all that you really need to do. It's not that you need to completely eradicate this problem. Just don't let it get out of hand.
Sometimes you can't control, you can only contain.
Yeah. And, you know, that's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
It's not a bad thing at all. It's not a bad thing to have these insects that are bad for your garden, because you're also creating that ecosystem with other beneficials, where if you just completely eliminate all of them, you're not going to have those beneficials later on, and then that's when the problem really will get worse.
I don't think any of us have ever completely wiped out any problem that we've had.
Right.
There's always going to be something left over.
Right. So finding the balance is the key.
You know, I was thinking just quickly about a book that the Reverend Dean Hole wrote at the turn of the last century. So it was called A Book About Roses. And there was a little story he talks in there about going to London and then just being sick of all the noise and the smells, and thinking about, I need to go back to my own rose garden. So he heads back there. And he talks about wandering in his rose garden in the evening, and he goes, armed with a cigar in case I met an aphis.
Yep.
You know, because they would take the cigars if they saw aphids and just put it close to the butt and, like, boom, heat up the aphid instead. So, you know, while you're in your garden, you know, you could, if you've got a hose and you've got aphids on a plant, you can shoot them off.
Yep.
Same thing works good for whitefly.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
And that covers just about
I think so.
all the beneficials, the good bugs,
info.
bad bugs.
well, there's all kinds of beneficials available out there.
Right.
The thing I guess we need to get across is just to let people know that they are out there, are available, and to do your own research online before you spray.
There you go. Hey, thank you for tuning into this iHeart Media podcast. Garden America, Bryan Main, John Bagnasco, Tiger Palafox. We'll do it again next couple of weeks or so. Don't forget the radio show every Saturday morning, 8 o'clock on the West Coast, 11 o'clock Eastern Time Zone. So for the entire crew, again, John Bagnasco, Tiger Palafox, I'm Bryan Main. Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We talked about good bugs, bad bugs, beneficial bugs. Any ideas for a future podcast, let us know. You can let us know on Facebook, and even maybe John at gardenamerica.com. Till next time, have a great day. Be safe. And we'll see you next time right here on the radio, in the radio, on Facebook. So many ways to catch our show. Take care.